We're very worried about every city in the United States and the potential for this virus to get out of control. If we do things together well, almost perfectly, we could get in the range of 100,000 to 200,000 fatalities.
That's right.
So if we do things almost perfectly, 200,000 Americans could still die from the coronavirus. Already the death toll stands at 3,003, more than the number of lives lost on 9/11.
So we keep getting to these grim milestones, Willie. Yesterday, more Americans had died by the coronavirus than died in the Afghanistan war. American troops over, the past 2 decades. By the end of today, more people will have died than died from terrorist attacks on September 11th. You seen that, as a doctor said yesterday, we could expect, if we do everything right.
That's a best case scenario.
A best case scenario. If we do everything right, then maybe 200,000 Americans will die if we do everything right. That obviously, it's more people than died in World War I and the Vietnam War combined. So this pandemic that a lot of Donald Trump supporters are still trying to underplay, that the president, of course, tried to underplay for a very long time. This is not the seasonal flu. It's extraordinarily deadly. And the great news for Americans is that the president's doctors are now admitting that publicly, and it appears that the president is still following their advice. That is really good news, even though we're going to be going through 2 to 3 horrible weeks.
Yeah, in a month, Joe and Mika, of daily sobering headlines, that one we woke up to yesterday was quite high on the list, where Dr. Deborah Birx, who's been pretty sober in analyzing the data, said, yes, 200,000 if we do everything right. We may lose 200,000 Americans to coronavirus. And as you talk about this in the context of war, Joe, if you live in New York City, if you've lived in New York City for a long time, there are images that will be seared into our minds from yesterday of the field hospitals going up inside Central Park, places where we walk our dogs and our kids play, of the USNS Comfort sailing past the Statue of Liberty and finding its dock on the west side of Manhattan to provide 1,000 more beds for New York City. The Jacob Javits Center, where we've been to boat shows and various events, now turned into a massive hospital on its own. And of course, the site that compelled the President of the United States to action, those freezer trucks pulled up outside hospitals in Queens, not far from where the president grew up, that have bodies being loaded into them because there's not enough room in the morgue of a hospital in Queens. These are images that will come to represent this crisis. And as we know, Mika, the president responds to that kind of a thing, and he went out of his way to say, did you see those images? I saw it right up the street from where I grew up. He's been compelled in the past in places like Syria, when he saw children dying, to take military action. Yeah. He saw some images through the media that compelled him to take this very, very seriously now and extend that date through April at least.
So, Mika, you and Willie both were in New York City on September 11th, on 9/11. And I know for a lot of Americans who came in after that, New York City seemed almost to be under a state of siege. Its routine was broken, and it seemed to be a country on the front lines at war. You look at these images and look at what New York's going through now. It seems that there are parallels with 9/11.
There are, and then there's some differences, because in the weeks and months after 9/11, the ground zero area of the city was really the hot spot that really symbolized the war and the situation we were in, and the rest of the city carried on. Right now, we're watching New York City get completely stopped in its tracks, with not one section of the city that's not impacted, and it will be something to see how history looks at the failed response to this pandemic, which had so many warnings so early on. And the fact that we are still scrambling on testing at this point, I can't imagine history will be kind on the presidency and on Washington's reaction.
Well, you know, as we get to testing, and again, I want to say what I said yesterday. The most important thing, the signal versus the ground noise, is the most important thing is that the president is listening to his science advisors and that he's moving aggressively in that direction. The ground noise, the attacking of the reporters, I said, reporters, we should just ignore that because he's trying to bait reporters into overreacting. His followers love that.
It's just part of a bigger story.
But there is some ground noise that he makes in these press conferences, Willie, that we have to point out because it's as he would say, fake news, and there's a health connection to it. When he says that testing is great, he had a conversation with governors and there's no problem with testing. Well, that's a lie. It's not helpful because it sends the wrong message to Americans that we don't need to work harder on tests. We do. There's a story in the Palm Beach Post this morning, which is, of course, the home paper of Donald Trump and Mar-a-Lago, that in a county of 1.4 million people, only about 2,300 have had tests. Let me look at it specifically here. So 1.4 million citizens in Trump's own Palm Beach County, only 2,721 tests have been given. And there are 330,000 people, according to this Palm Beach Post article this morning, 330,000 people, Willie, out of a population of 1.4 million who are calling, begging for tests. And for a president who several weeks ago said anybody who wants a test can get a test, which that just wasn't true, and is now saying we're not having a problem with testing. We are, and that's why all healthcare officials that I've spoken with say, take the number of infections that the United States has right now, multiply it by 10, because per capita, we're doing worse than anybody in the world in testing people. The under-testing actually is still making this country fly blind. I know there is some good news. Abbott Labs, other people rushing tests out, 100,000 a week. Let's hope that continues, and we celebrate that, and we want that to continue. But the president doesn't need to lie about this, because when he does lie about testing being perfect and continues to lie about it, well, that gives people a false sense of security in the middle of what he has called a war. That's like saying, oh, the Nazis, they're not a threat. We're doing great. Or the Japanese, yeah, they bombed Pearl Harbor, but everything's going perfect. No, we have to continue to prepare Americans and let them know where we're failing, and the United States government is still failing in testing. It's ramping up, and that's really good news, but the president doesn't need to lie about how we're doing at war.
Yeah, he opened his briefing yesterday at the White House by showing that device that will provide tests quickly, and that laboratory is ramping up and trying to get out there. But you're right that that's one point, although he's moved with Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx on moving the date to April 30th when everybody should stay home, he won't concede that point on testing, which is key because we don't really know how big the problem is. We can't get our arms around the problem until we have enough tests to test all these people. And we're months behind. All these companies are helping catch up, but there's still a lot of work to do. And
thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.